All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking an absolute masterclass in clinical psychology. Tell me, have you ever just felt completely overwhelmed by life? Like you're stuck at the bottom of a deep pit and you have literally no idea how to climb out? Well, we are going to break down the exact step-by-step psychological framework you need to pull yourself out of that abyss, face your deepest fears, and ultimately build a life of profound meaning.
Just listen to this striking testimonial from the source material. It perfectly sets the emotional stakes for what we're talking about today. This came from someone who felt they had just completely failed to reach their potential. And it really begs the question, how exactly do you pull yourself up when you feel that down and out? When just rolling out of bed feels like you're trying to summit Mount Everest?
That brings us to Section 1, the power of microsteps.
Look, when your life has completely fallen apart, aiming for the peak of the mountain is just paralyzing. Instead, clinical psychology uses this really fascinating behavioral approach called collaborative empiricism. You can't just command someone to magically get better. You have to lay all the problems out on the table, figure out what a better future actually looks like, and establish a strategy. But here is the real secret sauce. You have to break your goals down until you find a step so incredibly small that you will actually voluntarily take it. And hey, if you fail, you don't give up. You just make the step even smaller. The source shares this phenomenal example of a 30-year-old client whose life was just a total mess. His very first negotiated task was simply to vacuum his room, but he couldn't even do that. So what did he do? He brought the vacuum to the threshold of his room, leaned it at a 45-degree angle, and literally just stepped over it for a whole week. I know, it sounds a bit humiliating, right? But the crucial point here is that he actually got the vacuum out of the closet. He was finally looking the beast in the face, admitting his own limitations, and taking that very first humble step toward order.
So why does that embarrassing, tiny first step matter so much? Well, because once you take that first minuscule action, your progress is not linear. It multiplies exponentially. When you start, sure, you might feel like a bit of a fool. But anything that doubles grows unbelievably quickly. You are essentially building undeniable evidence of your own capabilities.
Moving right along to Section 2, confronting your inner dragons. Sometimes the problem isn't just a lack of motivation. Sometimes it's sheer, unadulterated terror. Take the extreme anxiety of agoraphobia, for example. A person traps themselves in their own home because the existential dread of the outside world triggers a massive, overwhelming panic attack. Their psychological protective walls have basically crumbled, and the existential panic rises to a point where they literally cannot leave their house. They shrink their entire livable world just to avoid the dragon.
So how do you confront a dragon like that? Say it's a debilitating fear of getting trapped in an elevator, which often represents a deeper fear of death and public humiliation. You definitely don't just shove the person inside. You establish a threshold of tolerance. Can you look at a picture of an elevator? Can you stand 125 yards down the hall from one? You find the absolute edge of their fear and you dance on that edge. You ask them to step just 1 foot forward. By doing this, they aren't merely getting used to elevators, they are fundamentally expanding their domain of competence. They are proving to themselves that they're an active agent who can actually change their own life.
Now, as we expand outward, we hit Section 3, navigating relationship conflict. Once you start mastering your own internal fears, you inevitably expand outward to your relationships. And according to the source material, a partnership really needs to be run like a small business. Think about it. To avoid total domestic disaster, you have to establish strict rules of engagement. You wouldn't run a company by shouting at your coworkers whenever you felt like it, right? You need parameterized meetings. Don't argue when you're hungry or exhausted at the end of a long workday. You need to carve out at least 90 minutes a week specifically to listen to your partner and run the household business.
And this highlights the single biggest communication trap we all fall into. When your partner is upset, it is so incredibly tempting to just jump straight in and offer a quick solution. But true active listening requires letting your partner do what the psychologist Carl Jung called circumambulation. They essentially need to talk in spirals. They need to lay out all their anxieties to unearth the hidden snakes in the grass. If you jump in to fix it immediately, you're almost certainly going to fix the wrong problem. You really just have to stay quiet, ask questions in good faith, and wait to find the actual target.
Which brings us to a really harsh but absolutely vital truth. Avoiding these difficult conversations, it's disastrous. Papering over issues just because you're tired or because you want to keep the peace practically ensures that when the conflict finally explodes, and it will, it's going to be entirely unmanageable. You just have to fight it through to the bottom, fix it, and move on.
This leads us naturally into Section 4, Healing Your Foundation.
What's super fascinating here is that these interpersonal conflicts, they very often reveal a much deeper, much older pain. Think of trauma like hidden holes in your bedroom floor. If you encountered a massive problem when you were, say, 4 years old and you couldn't resolve it, you essentially stopped maturing in relationship to that specific problem. So, when a modern-day conflict with your boss or your spouse triggers that old hole, you fall right in, you regress, and suddenly you react into your adult life using the very limited, fearful emotional tools of a 4-year-old.
You can't just toss a few planks of wood over these holes and cross your fingers hoping you won't step on them. You have to bravely map out your past. You've got to figure out exactly where you met the devil at the crossroads and took the wrong path. You have to acknowledge the bad choice, and then, and this is absolutely the most important part, you have to actively negotiate and specify a brand new road forward. Because once you have a map for your future, that past trauma is rendered irrelevant. You finally know where you are going.
And finally, we arrive at Section 5, Truth and Voluntary Responsibility.
Ultimately, fixing your foundation forces you to gaze deep into the proverbial heart of darkness. Our modern culture really loves to push this idea of radical subjectivity, a kind of hollow, whim-based identity that's totally rooted in short-term appetites and immediate gratification. But let's be honest, acting like a 2-year-old only produces anxiety and misery in the long run. True maturity, the subsidiary solution, requires integrating all your fragmented impulses, your fear, your hunger, your anger, into a solid identity that's built entirely on taking on the heavy load of responsibility.
The absolute best antidote to all that miserable self-focus, it's this beautiful upward hierarchy. First, you integrate yourself just so you can tolerate being around other people. Then you establish a partnership. From there, you expand your responsibility to serve your children, then your local community, your nation, and eventually, the ultimate good. The better solution is always the one that unites more people across broader spans of time.
Because our individual choices ripple outward and affect this entire overarching structure of society, the most practical rule for a meaningful life is actually pretty straightforward. Completely stop lying. The source heavily emphasizes that even seemingly innocent white lies warp reality. A true statement works for you, it works for the other person, it works today, and it's still going to work a month from now. If you ever find yourself forced to lie, it means you took a wrong turn somewhere way further upstream.
So I'm going to leave you with this one final provocative thought from today's explainer. If you truly believe in good, are you actually willing to accept the unbearable, exhilarating adventure of speaking the truth? Are you ready to finally confront your dragons, fill those hidden holes in your floor, and carry your own share of voluntary responsibility? Because honestly, that is the only true way to climb out of the abyss. Think about it. What could your very first micro step be today? We'll see you next time.